Hello, and welcome to an overview of Chapter 7 in the content marketing textbook that I penned back at the end of 2021. Today's chapter is all about visual content, and today I'm switching it up a little bit because it is a visual content chapter. I am going to use the slides as well as keep myself on video, at least for the next, minute or so. Typically, I just jump straight into the slides, but today it's going to be a little bit different. I will say up front, I am not going to spend a ton of time on just the loose definitions of these different types of visual content. Rather, it's going to be more about the building of infographics and the integration into a larger strategy, specifically on social media, as that is really where visual content has had a lot of its success. So I'm going to go ahead and take myself off of video so I can better address the slides here. All right. So first off, a few quick word on the dominance of visual content. People say all the time, I'm a visual learner, or there's visual learners in the class. And well, most people are visual learners. It's pretty rare that you come across somebody who says, oh, you know what, I'm an audio learner. I need to hear it before I can learn it. It's just the society today is really dominated by visual learners across the board. And a lot of it is because of these numbers here. 90% of the information that comes to the brain is composed of visuals. Visuals are all around us every day. And visuals can help improve your learning by up to 400%. And I don't know the methods behind where this number came from, but I did not only find this research, but fact checked it and I looked back to ensure that that was an accurate statement. And it is. And it's something that a lot of people utilize as a piece of support when they are making the argument for visual content or visual learning in general. So what does that mean in terms of content? Well, first off, visuals really are everywhere. I'm going to go through several today, the different types of visual content. There's some that you probably haven't even thought about, but I'm pretty sure you've seen most of these at some point. Really, the big key takeaway here in this video today is how you can apply some of these types that you might have seen as a joke or as a meme, and how can you apply them into a business, a branding strategy. We're not going to dig into a ton of that. Again, we're going to really try to focus on infographics and how we do implement some of the strategies here. But really, I look at the different types of visual content and what is kind of its main purpose. And it's true. Most forms are used humorously first, especially when you look at social networks like Twitter, Reddit, even on Instagram to an extent. There's some of the biggest Instagram accounts that aren't celebrities are what they call meme accounts. And these are just accounts that put up memes all the time. They have millions and millions of followers. And the people that started them back in the day, I think one example is at Trash Can Paul on Instagram. He or she or whoever the person is that is behind it can turn that account into a true revenue generator because they have such high engagement rates. They post content that so many people find value in and they'll give likes to, that it really becomes a legitimate business driving strategy. Now, if you think about an existing brand that's already here, that you're already working with, think about maybe one that you are utilizing for a project. You really need to think about which ones you can pick and choose to integrate into a larger strategy. And whether that's social media or it's on the website or anything else, you really want to think about first and foremost on visuals, how they can help a brand's online appearance. And that is typically done via a website or social media. So this is the first, just to step back. I'm going to quickly go through the different forms of visual content. Again, most of if not all of these, you are familiar with. It's more about their applications, which we will get to in a little bit. First, you have the good old photo. This is one with a person specifically. This is an actual drawing. It's not technically a drawing, right? That image of the bird is probably computer generated. And these days, AI is making great leaps and strides in terms of artistry. Now I look at this here and I think of it as a drawing, but they are definitely valuable in the larger visual content hierarchy in that they're not common and that they can be applied to a larger brand strategy pretty easily. This screenshot is actually from another university, and they have turned their entire magazine into one that uses images like this. A lot of their content is based on research and based on like animals and sciences, and so a lot of what they have drawn and what they have pulled from, rather than say stock photos, which is what this guy back here is, uh, they decide to create this imagery themselves, and it creates a brand that has a lot of different, I guess we could say, there's a lot of different elements to it and a lot of different opinions on what that means. But for me, I think of it as one that is fairly high class, something that is kind of like think of how you would think of a nice piece of art. It can be a little elitist, yes, but at the same time, it can also be people can look at it as very authoritative and kind of like the best in class if you think of it from an academic sense. This is a comic strip. People see comic strips all the time, and this is probably something that has been around as long as any, that they've been in newspapers since for hundreds of years. Now, this is comic strips there's a lot of different elements and different ways that you can use this. If you think about it from a branding perspective, it's something that you really need to consider in terms of what is the purpose of this? How are you getting something across? The number one thing I always look at with comic strips is that it can help give light to a serious situation, or it can make something difficult to understand seem a little bit easier to understand. And then you have your design graphics. This is a word mark specifically, not technically a word mark, but this is just a design graphic that Social Media Examiner. They do these for all of their new articles, and that also helps for social media purposes because they will put this up accompanying a post. Here is a meme. Memes, and this next one, which is a GIF or GIF, whatever. It's going to be important to differentiate these, not because of just how you talk about it in your day-to-day life, but just from a definition standpoint. You have your meme, which is static, and sometimes it has text on it, sometimes it doesn't. I choose to use the more common type, and especially one from Lord of the Rings here. I know Lord of the Rings has recently become more back in the spotlight with their new TV show. But then GIFs, those are actually moving images, and this is done through a series of low quality photos or images that are put together. So kind of like almost like a flip book. They're not usually very long. This is pretty short. I think you can get through it in 4 seconds ish. And sometimes they're animated like this one, but oftentimes GIFs are clips of movies or TV shows or other pop culture that people either automatically know the reference from, or it's something that is generic enough that it applies to a specific situation in a humorous way. Back to the meme side, once again, it is something that you want to think about in terms of, are people going to understand it first? And then secondly, are people going to actually like get the reference and find humor in it? Memes by default, by definition, are supposed to be funny. Now, whether or not there's so many memes today that sometimes they are still funny, sometimes they're not. But you need to be sure that when you are integrating it into a larger strategy, especially on social media, that it is one from the brand perspective point of view is not going to come up short. It's not going to confuse people, and that it is still in line with what the brand is standing for. GIFs, on the other hand, I think from a business perspective, they make the most sense like this, where you essentially use it as an eye-catching, attention-grabbing element. And this is a visual that to me works really well on social media. This is the kind of thing that can stop people from doom scrolling. And it's also something that you could put in a blog as a banner image as well. It's For me, GIFs as from video perspectives, they will work. And I think they work really well in blogs if you can make the connection and it fits with the tone of voice and how the brand has established itself in the eyes of the reader. But in terms of a primary piece of visual content that's trying to do what some of the other pieces here are doing, well, that is where you need to get creative and where something like this can really help. You can make these for free. There's a lot of websites out there that will allow you to enter in various inputs, like what is the image? It's a rocket ship. What is the text? What does it say? How GIFs can fire up your content marketing. What else do you want? Oh, I want it to be shooting up into the sky. Again, AI is becoming very advanced very quickly. And if you use it in the right areas, for me, I think this is one area where that works really well. You can really see some big payoff. When it comes to AI content writing, not a fan. But when it comes to AI content designing, definitely for me, I'm much more of a proponent. Then you have data visualizations. This is something that is becoming very, very popular. I subscribe to an email called Charter, which is the word at the bottom. And a couple times a week, they'll send an email about what's hot in the news. Generally, it's economy related news, such as the oat milk price or oat milk, search trends. But sometimes it also deals with the price. There was one a couple weeks ago recently that looked at the price of oat milk compared to almond milk, soy milk, and then regular cow's milk. It was really surprising to see the changes in that, especially over the last 6 months or so with inflation. Data visualizations are essential for most businesses when they're trying to communicate key findings from any sort of original research or secondary research. For me, I have found some good success when I just take some like social media stats and put them into a chart or something. When they are when they're designed in like a bar chart or a graph like this, it really helps to show the readers or the viewers the true disparity in numbers. If you see the numbers or hear the numbers, 2,000 versus 200,000, that's one thing. And people have a certain you can conjure a thought. Okay, that's a big difference. When you're reading it on a page, probably a little bit less actually. But when you see the difference on a chart, that's where it really is shockingly different. Where you're like, wow, this is a massive difference in numbers. And well, it works for really big contrast. It also works for really little contrast because you look here on this chart here, and you can see how oat milk has had a steady rise of popularity over the course of the last 6 years. Meanwhile, you see almond milk is kind of up and down, up and down. And you look at this and you think, oh, oat milk is on the rise. If you had just communicated this through the use of numbers in a table, it would not have nearly the same effect. It wouldn't be on my slides. Charter would not be that popular of a place. And a lot of people just wouldn't understand the true growth of oat milk, which is the point of this whole graphic. There's some other visual forms that are not displayed here in this presentation. There's presentations, which is like all of these slides. There's screenshots, which is something that you would take from your computer or from your phone. And then there's infographics, which we'll talk about in a second. Presentations do really, really well on LinkedIn for some reason. If you were to give a business presentation and then you go home, you go to LinkedIn and you say, hey, I just delivered a presentation today, did really well. It's like a public speaking engagement. Here's my slides from the day. And you upload your slides as a document, which LinkedIn allows. You can upload a document. It will display it as an individual slideshow, essentially, where you can look at one at a time, side by side. And first off, almost everybody that you're connected with is going to see it. And then secondly, it's going to probably get the highest engagement rate of any LinkedIn post you've done recently, because if people scroll at all to see what else is there besides the first two slides, that counts as a post engagement. And obviously, as engagements go up, the wider your reach goes for your post and the more people see it. I look at presentations as an incredibly valuable piece of content for social media, particularly with PowerPoint with LinkedIn. But there are other areas where presentations can work, just not necessarily here. Screenshots can be pretty valuable as well. If you think about how sometimes you see text from like an iPhone texting or anything like that, those are pretty powerful. And then two can be infographics, but we're going to get to that next. So then when do you want to use visual content? That is really where we're going to spend a little bit more of this time here today. And that's really, we want to start with websites and blog posts. First, any type of visual content can work on a website. Anything that I've talked about so far, presentation or anything else like that. The real question is, where is it going to be and how is it going to be utilized? If we start with what you see on a website first, for almost any website, at least when you're on a desktop, think about the banner image. That is the image that you see at the top, as you see here with the Squarespace that I pulled here. And this is the position that is at the top of a web page and is really supposed to communicate initially the look and feel of the website, as well as whatever it is that you want the larger, broader societal purpose of the site to be. These are typically either photos or designed graphics, as you see here with Squarespace. I mean, this is a combination of both, but it also typically includes the brand colors that go with it. When you think about the actual body of the web page and the other images that go in there with it, that is where you can integrate other types of content. That is where a meme could fit, a GIF could fit. If you want to put a presentation file or anything else, photos, those work really well within the flow of content, especially if it is a written post. To me, this is kind of a no-brainer. Any web page without any images is something that's going to really struggle to keep any users engaged. Now, when you think about a blog, and I know recently blogging has been covered, you want to think about how visuals can help break up long prose and how it also is really good for user experience. When I think of a blog post, a really successful one, you usually don't see more than a couple of paragraphs before there's some sort of content that breaks it up. Not just white space, but something else. Typically, it's a visual. Sometimes it's an embedded video. Sometimes it might be an embedded podcast or something. But this is also good for search engine optimization because when Google is crawling a website, it's going to look for those other elements. If Google crawls a website and just sees straight text, that's not going to help the case for the website. Now, there are some other technical elements to consider. For example, you don't want to upload super large image files or large files at all because you want your content to be able to load quickly. You don't want to you don't want to have your website be living in the past, back in the early 2000s when websites could take entire minutes to load. And when you hear that word minutes, that may seem like, not a lot of time, but right now Google is at a place with search engine optimization where they will ding you if your images take less than 3 seconds or take more than 3 seconds to load. And we are at a place now where images are essential to content and to social media, but so too is their ability to quickly load. And so finding that sweet spot is really going to be imperative as you are managing a brand online. But you also want to think about, you want diverse content. Most blogs are only going to have maybe, photos, for example. Maybe there'll be some design graphics. You don't usually get a ton of different types, which is good and bad. On one side, that is really helpful because it helps to communicate something that blog text alone cannot. And it also helps to keep the brand kind of on point. If you have a blog post that has a comic strip, a photo, a design graphic, data visualization, and a screenshot, that's kind of a lot of different things for people to be looking at. And chances are they're not going to be able to get a good overall first impression of the brand itself in terms of what it is, what it stands for, what the color scheme is, what kind of content is that they promote, things like that. So having at least, when I say diverse content, on one side, I do think it is important to have different forms in terms of like video, audio, written, visual. But at the same time, you do want to be very intentional and very strategic about what that is. If you're going to put a photo in the body of your blog, make sure that it is on brand and that it is keeping up with general the general look and feel that you want. The same goes for any other type of visual content that you then post. Now, with videos, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Visuals are essential elements to videos. If you just sit there and talk for 20 minutes, it's probably not going to do as well as if you have some visuals like I have here with these slides. It engages users. You can do all sorts of different stuff. Social media videos are a great example. Like TikTok, you'll see people will like use backgrounds. They'll use different images in the background. They'll do a side by side. All sorts of different types of videos utilize visuals in some way. And to me, I think some of the best video performances on TikTok, the ones that usually do well, go viral, I guess you could say, utilize visual content in some form. Now, with social media, I don't know. I mean, these are the only couple numbers that I really trust, but there's more crazier numbers out there. Tweets with images will generate 150% more retweets than those without them. Yes, I think I totally believe that. Images are really the core piece of any good way to stop somebody from scrolling through Twitter. Facebook images will generate 2.3 times more engagements. I also agree with that. That's usually photos, and they're usually photos with people. Photos with people also do better on Instagram. That's what Instagram will tell you, or Meta will tell you. And I think of the best Instagram photos not being those of like a really nice landscape, but of somebody or somebody's multiple people really doing something that's that causes some sort of emotional connection. Because it's really when people consume so much social media in such a short period of time that you need that attention grabbing visual, and then something that connects with them to keep them there. Now we have infographics. So this is an example of an infographic that is all about the content. Actually, I believe this is a video content workflow. And it goes through a couple of the various steps. If you think about how an actual infographic works, there's a couple of different steps, a couple best practices that you want to use. First off, as you look through that, you want to make sure, first off, that you're limiting the text that you use. And this one, there's a lot of text, but it's limited. You never see more than 3-4 days ahead of time. 3 or 4 words together. Although this infographic is meant to be filled in by somebody, because you see in all the sections there is a blank underline. Now, when you think about other infographics, there are some others like this one where I think there's too much text. There's too much text. There's too much color. There's just too much going on. So if you can limit the text that you're using, I think that's going to really help communicate a clearer message like we have here. You also want to be sure to utilize headings in multiple levels of text. Here, it does that. You see plan at the top, then create plan, create topic and angle, and approve plan. Great. Here, you don't see as many. You see onboarding emails. That's about it. And you also need to develop a visual connection. So the content here relates pretty well. They're in sections. It's not great. Here it works a little bit better because it is based on little sections. You know, onboarding emails, subscriber emails, promotional emails, etc. But then you also need to take advantage of your space. So this one definitely does that. It takes advantage of that to the max. Whereas here they don't really do that. Everything's pretty packed in there. You also want to be able to add icons and lines or arrows. So here is a really good example with icons and lines. I don't see any arrows, but there's plenty of those. Then you also need to just decide on a color scheme. This doesn't have one. I mean, it uses all of them. There's every color under the rainbow there. On the other hand, when you want to have a color scheme here, it's pretty straightforward. They use Facebook's coloring of dark blue on the left, and they just went with the Google green, even though there's several Google colors on the right. Finally, you do want to include your brand or logo. You see one at the footer here, and then you see one at the footer here, and you see one at the very, very bottom of this first one. That's going to be important because if your content gets shared and infographics like this end up on a different presentation about infographics, you'll be able to get the credit of who created it. You have CoSchedule who created this one, Zoombi who created this one, including a link, which I'm not a huge fan of because you have to type it in. And then Think Digit, which is the brand there. And really, that wraps up infographics. And just to go back really quickly, when I'm looking at these three infographics, to me, this is really a great example. It is, it's clearly delineated half and half. It breaks down Facebook, it breaks down Google, Facebook ads, Google ads, and then how to compare the campaigns. The one thing I don't love is the really small text in each section, but I think you can get past that because you're seeing the major words that allow you to scan it easily. I think if they could get rid of the little tiny descriptions, I think that would make this a perfect infographic, but it's not quite there. However, it's better than this because of the crazy amount of squishing in all this content and all of the colors. And it's better than this, which I think is a little bit too minimalist. It looks like this was created using Canva and they just copy and pasted text in a couple spots. Not to mention, this is actually a plan, so you can print this out onto a really long piece of paper and fill in the numbers in terms of the days before publish. And that wraps up the visual content chapter. Hopefully you can see how visual content relates really well and does really well as a content form. I didn't get into as much content or visual content as a primary or secondary / supplemental content, nor did we really talk about the data funnel. But if there's one type of content that has enough going on that it doesn't need that discussion, it's this one. So hopefully you have gotten a little bit of inspiration from these different types that you've seen here today, and I will see you next time.